The reading that I did while we started sitting was the beginning of the fascicle Buddha Alone Together with Buddhas, which is the fascicle from Dogen that I talked about last week, which talked about traces versus attributes. So Buddhas alone together with Buddhas. So right here in this room and our extended Zendo, which includes those of you online, so we're all Buddhas together with Buddhas, waking up. Some teaching from Dogen that I talked about last week, it's been very stimulating for a lot of people. I've had people write me, I've had people talk to me in Dokusan about it, and I want to start my talk tonight with just a little bit more reflection on that. Let's see, we have some people who haven't heard it, so I think I'll read some of what I read. So this is a different translation. I've got this whole version of the entire Shokugenzo that I inherited from Shishin Roshi, which is a Gyodo Nishijima Roshi's translation. So it's not the typical Kaz Tanahashi translations that most of us are familiar with from Dogen. There's a saying from ancient times that none other than fish knows the mind of fish, and none other than birds can follow the traces of birds. Few people have been able to know this principle. Fish together with fish always know each other's mind. They're never ignorant of each other as human beings are. When they're going to swim upstream, this is known to all, and together they make their mind one. The mind to get through the 9 rapids of Jokyang also is communicated in common, but none other than fish know this mind. Again, when birds are flying through the sky, walking creatures never imagine, even in a dream, the knowing of these tracks, or the seeing and following of these traces. Walking creatures don't know that such traces exist. So there's no example of walking creatures imagining such traces. Birds, however, can see in many ways that hundreds or thousands of small birds have flocked together and flown away, or that these are the traces of big birds that have gone south or flown north, and so many lions. Not only can they tell that birds have gone, but they can tell what size they are and what direction they're going. To birds, those traces are more evident than wheel tracks in a lane or a horse's hoof prints visible in the grass. Birds see the traces of birds. This principle also applies to Buddhas. They suppose how many ages Buddhas have spent in practice, and they know small Buddhas and great Buddhas, even among those who have gone uncounted, unnoticed. These are things that when we are not Buddha, we never know at all. It's with the eye of Buddha that those traces can be seen. And those who are not Buddha are not equipped with the eye of Buddha. If with our own eyes we can see these traces, we may be in the presence of Buddhas, and we may be able to compare their footprints. In the comparing, Buddha's traces are known, the length and depth of Buddha's traces are known, and through consideration of Buddha's traces, the illumination of our own traces is realized. To realize these traces may be called the Buddha Dharma. So in the other translation that I did, there was a comparison between traces and attributes. Okay, so walking creatures such as us, deluded creatures. So, everyone here, just to say it, we're walking creatures and we're Buddhas. So we're all Buddhas, okay, but we're not all awake to our own Buddha nature. And that's what Zen practice is waking up to our own Buddha nature. So when we're not awake to our own Buddha nature, then we see the world in a different way, and we see ourselves in a different way. We see what one translation of this fascicle says is we see attributes instead of traces. Okay. To see attributes is to see qualities in beings. Okay, we might see a person, we say, oh, they're very calm, they're very enlightened, they're very awake, they're very wise, right? All of these are attributes that we're kind of assigning to a person, an entity, a being that we believe is there and that we have a relationship. So in the seeing of the person, let's say, with attributes, we are understanding ourselves to be a person with attributes. That's the consciousness that is alive in that relationship. But there's a different consciousness that's alive when we see traces, when we recognize traces of the Buddha. There's some kind of indication that awakened mind was active, was expressive, was present. That awakened mind is active, is awakened, is present right now. But this presence, this trace, it's subtle. Because our minds are so conditioned to see things and people and qualities and attributes, subjects with adjectives, nouns with adjectives applied. This, until we're very awake to reality, nature appears to us in a subtle way as indications or traces or whiffs, was the word that one of us shared last week. It's a subtle sign of the true dimension of reality. So in our Buddhist practices, we could say partly it's looking for signs of traces, for looking for these signs of traces in ourselves and in the world and in others, to seek out with that eye, is this awakened mind that is present, that is speaking, that is acting. We can't make it personal and keep it impersonal. It's not me or you. It's awakened mind or deluded mind. Big mind, big consciousness, or small mind and small consciousness. These are very, very different things. Yeah, very different things, very, very discrete. And then when you recognize these traces in the world, you begin to see them in your own life. And the more you see them in your own life, within your own consciousness and your own functioning, then you see it more in the world. And then that resonance really supports ongoing awakening, bigger and bigger. But we can't take any personal credit for any of this. As soon as we take credit for it, I have an insight, I have a realization, I have some level of attainment. Okay, now it's become an attribute again. And I've become a me again. And we're right back in delusion. It's not a trace anymore. Okay. We continue to attune ourselves to the traces. It's subtle. Yeah. The sage who shared with me the quote from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, the Blake piece, where he shares the exact same insight, I think, that Dogen had. How do you know, but every bird that cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight, closed by your senses 5. And I remember this book that came out a couple of years ago, I think it was. It was called An Immense World, which plays off of this Blake line, how animal senses reveal the hidden realms around us. which I remember when it came out, I was like, I want to read that book, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but has anybody read it? Did you?
I haven't read it yet, but it's on my...
It's on your list.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
I haven't finished it. But
Haven't finished it. Is it mind-blowing?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, completely. And of course, you know, how do we know? We're inferring what they're sensing, but there's...
But we have no idea. I mean,
We have no idea, exactly, we have no idea, right? Right, but then again, how do those birds, you know, stay in the flock? How do they know? It's the mind, it's the quality of mind. Even Dogen, you know, talked about it. It's a whole different quality of mind. Okay, so I want to just continue to appreciate that in our collective consciousness and offer that to you. And then I want to pivot into a different koan to share for today's talk. And this has perhaps some relevance or some applicability in today's circumstances. So let's appreciate a few dimensions of this. Blue Cliff Record, case 66, Getting the Sword. Ganto asked a monk, "Where have you come from?" The monk said, "From the western capital." Ganto said, "After the rebel Koso passed through there, did you get his sword?" The monk said, "Yes, I got it." Ganto stuck out his neck, approached the monk, and said, "Ah!" The monk said, "The master's head has fallen." Ganto roared with laughter. Later, the monk went to Seppo. Seppo asked, "Where have you come from?" The monk said, "From Ganto." Seppo asked, "What did he say?" The monk told him what had happened, and Seppo gave him 30 blows with his stick and drove him away. Eyes of surprise. Yeah. So, for those of you who might be new to Zen, koans like this are stories that are kind of teaching stories, because there's an exchange that happens oftentimes between a student and a teacher, you know, two beings, two consciousnesses that come into relation that kind of opens up a dimension of consciousness that is a more awake dimension of consciousness. So there's oftentimes a breakthrough from a traditional normative mode of consciousness or an identification into a different, bigger mode of consciousness. And that's what happens, or is being presented in this koan. I want to give a little bit about the context of this, because it's really interesting. It's really interesting to me. This matter of the rebel Koso, who's been present in the Western capital. Any resemblance to actual political events happening today are entirely coincidental. In no way motivated in my introduction of this koan tonight. So in Chinese, so this is really something that happened in Chinese history. It was called the Koso Rebellion, or the Huangchao Rebellion. It started in the 870s, so it was the late Tang Dynasty, and it was led by this Chinese fellow named Koso. It was triggered by severe drought and famine that struck northern and central China, causing starving people to join criminal gangs. Okay? So this was, you know, this was major, and as I'll go on to say, it actually contributed to the fall of the Tang Dynasty in the next few decades that had been around for quite a while. But you know, huge social unrest, right? Gangs of bandits forming, drought and famine throughout the realm, warlords rising up and storming the Western capital. I mean, if we think we have social and political unrest right now, you know, it doesn't hold a candle to this. You know, I mean, hopefully we don't get anywhere near something like this, but this is, you know, this is major social unrest that's happening. And in the midst of it, we have strong Zen practice, and we have such strong Zen practice, such strong teachings that come to us, and such strong awakenings that are being experienced by people, that we're still talking about it 120 years later. Okay, so nothing gets in the way of our practice, and everything, particularly times like this, when things are really unsettled, can be, opportunities for profound awakening. So this guy Koso, he actually was he was described as a well-educated salt smuggler. I want like the Game of Thrones guys to like create a whole series around this Koso rebellion. Is there a question? Do you have that? No? Okay. He's a well-educated salt smuggler, and he became disillusioned after failing the civil service examination. So, how many? I just kind of put this together, but how many federal, employees are losing their jobs? Who I feel. I mean, I have coaching clients, who number amongst them, and it's terrible what they're experiencing. But yeah, are any of them going to, go into salt smuggling and then join a rebellion? And maybe there's going to be a rebellion of them. There's actually in what I've read about, Koso, there's not a judgment about him. Like he was this horrible warlord who created violence and killed a lot of people. His forces grew to as many as 600,000 followers. And they call them followers, not soldiers. So, this might have been like a real, almost like civic movement. I don't know. But, so, according to legend, one day he suddenly obtained a sword dropped from the sky and fell to him, and it was inscribed, "Heaven gives this to Koso." And this happened, this is what precipitated him joining the forces of this other fellow called Wang, who brought their forces together, and then Wang died and Koso became the leader of the rebellion. So Koso initially joined forces with Wang, and they later split due to a disagreement over accepting an official position from the Tang government. So I have a feeling Wang actually went ahead and took a position, so he got bought off, perhaps, but then he ended up dying. So, and then Koso's forces grew to as many as 600,000 followers, and they conducted guerrilla attacks against the Tang army. Okay, so they were soldiers, burning and plundering cities as far south as Canton, Guangzhou. I take it back, it wasn't like a peaceful civic movement, it was a militaristic, pretty aggressive military movement. There's always these factions, when we have like rebellions and then factions break up. So it's happening now. So the rebellion lasted from 875 to 884. It's about 9 years, and it significantly weakened the Tang dynasty. At its peak, Koso's forces captured the Tang capital of Chang'an, that was the western capital that's referred to in this koan, forcing the emperor to flee. Huang Chao, Koso, briefly proclaimed himself emperor of the kingdom of Qi, but was eventually defeated and killed 3 years later in 884. Boy, storming the capital, taking over, right? Declaring himself emperor, getting beaten back and killed. This rebellion had long-lasting effects on Chinese history, as the Tang dynasty was unable to recover from the widespread destruction, famine, and unrest it caused, ultimately leading to its fall in 906, which was like 20 years later. Not a very auspicious story, is it? Boy, I hadn't really intended to bring in, a doom and gloom kind of dystopian prophecy by any means. But what I did want to bring in is that, we live in really dire times, very similar to this. And we can apply ourselves to waking up in this time, right? So in this koan, the monk comes from Chang'an. So he's come from the capital, which has been taken over by the rebel. And what does Ganto ask? Does he ask, how's the rebellion going? What are their conditions there? How's the resistance going? Anything like that. No. He says, did you get Koso's sword? Koso, with certainly some grandiosity and probably, megalomanian delusion, told a story that the sword dropped from heaven proclaiming him emperor. A sword is a big symbol in Buddhism of Prajna, wisdom. So Ganto asks, okay, not, what side are you on? What political position are you taking? What are you doing to foster the resistance? He's saying, what wisdom have you gained? What mind are you showing up here with right now? That's the important thing in this moment. So now this monk, just to talk a bit more about how this whole exchange works out, the monk says, so he understands Ganto's request. Did you get the wisdom? Do you have the wisdom? Are you awakened? You could say. And he says, yeah, I did. A pretty gutsy thing for the monk to say. And Ganto comes up and goes, presenting his neck as if to say, chop my head off. Use it. Use it. Use your wisdom. Use the sword. I want to say a little aside about Ganto here. So Ganto, some of you know, is a very famous Zen master from the late Tang Dynasty. And he was close Dharma brothers with Seppo, the other teacher who appears in this tale a little bit later on. And he actually died very young, probably just a few years after the events of this koan. His monastery was raided by bandits. The whole society was being overrun by bandits, right? And it was invaded, and they were going after Buddhist treasures and statues and jewels. And the bandits invaded. They didn't find anything there, and they were so pissed that they killed Ganto. They stabbed him to death with a sword, probably. And according to legend, Ganto's scream when he was killed could be heard for 10 miles. So it's really weird, right, to have this koan come down from us. Like probably a few years before that happened, he's actually presenting his neck in this incredible act of compassion and teaching to say, well, use your wisdom and cut off that ego consciousness, right? That's what he's saying. Cut off ego consciousness. Use your sort of prajna. And the monk, unfortunately, he doesn't quite really manifest it. What does he do? He says, the master's head is already fallen. The master's head has already fallen. He just kind of gets into this little scholarly, position. He doesn't bring it alive. Now Ganto, what does Ganto do? Ganto laughs. Okay. Now if you first read this, or if you don't quite understand the depth of this koan, you might say, oh, Ganto's kind of joshing with him, appreciating him. But there's a real edge, there's a real sword in Ganto's laughter. There's a comment on Ganto's laughter in this koan. It goes, when genuine teachers of our school help people, sometimes they trap them and do not let them come out, and sometimes they release them and let them be slovenly. After all, they must have a place to appear. So Ganto here is kind of allowing the monk to be slovenly. Okay? He's letting him off the hook, you could say, but just giving him the opportunity to express himself, and to have him kind of wake up another day, if you will. I operate this way. Sometimes people ask me whether I agreed with something that somebody said in our discussions. And sometimes, well, often I don't. And sometimes I'll engage someone in like a dialogue if I don't, and sometimes I'll just kind of nod and say, okay, I accept that view, if that's how you see it. But that's how Zen, teaching exchanges operate. It's not always one way. So then the monk, who probably thinks he's got full approval from Ganto, with his laughter, goes on to Seppo, who is his Dharma brother. And he asked where he's coming from. He said, from Ganto. He said, well, what did he say? And he told the story, and now Seppo brings it down, brings the hammer down. Oh my God. Get it. Whack, 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 whack. Okay. Hopefully the monk had an awakening. It's not recorded whether he did, but maybe, hopefully he did. Okay. So, what I'd like you to take away from this koan is to really grasp the sword. Really grasp the sword of Prajna. Don't just talk about it. Don't just look for attributes that you think apply to Buddha. The realization is not what you imagine it to be. It is impossible to imagine what realization is like. And when you do wake up, you will see that all of your ideas about realization had nothing to do with realization. So don't take the bait of this imaginative mind, of this idea, thinking mind, around what awakened mind is all about. Be very, very, very vigilant about your own investment in your own opinions, in your own ideas about what's right and wrong. Yeah. We've got a lot of civic unrest, going on right now. There's a lot of greed, anger, and ignorance just going like crazy. And under these conditions, it's easy to get wrapped up in that, to get wrapped up in the divisiveness, to get wrapped up in the opinionating, to get wrapped up in the ideas about what's right and wrong. I just encourage us to look at where the traces of delusive mind are manifesting, right? Where greed, anger, and ignorance are on display, are operating. How they're operating. Don't make it about people, make it about poisons and make it about prajna. Where are the poisons operating, and how can you bring a more awakened way of being to that, to the situation here? Right? Really, this egoic investment, this personal investment that we have in our ideas about what needs to be done, and really gets in the way. Okay? And it even can paralyze us. It can freeze us, get stuck. And then you can go, oh, the master's head has already fallen. Oh, well, that's right, and that's wrong. And he's a good guy, and he's a bad guy. And they're... really grasp the sword. Grasp the sword. Okay, of awakened mind. And then forget yourself. Throw yourself away. Empty yourself in the exercise of that sword. Delusion is something that does not exist. Enlightenment is something that does not exist. So what do you do?